Another Axle Tube video presents Diary of a Wimpy Kid The Getaway by Jeff Kinney, narrated by Axel. December, Sunday. The worst part of having someone tell you about their vacation is trying to pretend you're happy for them. Because no one wants to hear about all the fun they didn't have, like getting to go on a hot air balloon ride. The only vacations I want to hear about are the ones where things went wrong. Like having your hot air balloon ride ruined by getting stuck in a tree. That way, I don't feel bad for missing out. Well, my family just got back from vacation, and believe me, if I could have stayed home, I would have. But I didn't have a choice. A few weeks ago, this vacation wasn't even supposed to happen. We were just having a normal December, and I was really looking forward to Christmas. But Mom and Dad were getting all stressed out about everything we had to do to get ready for the holidays. We were way behind on decorating the house, and nothing was going the way it was supposed to, including when our Christmas tree fell over and lots of ornaments broke. I'm sure we could have gotten our act together in time for Christmas. But one night, an ad came on TV that totally turned our holidays upside down. The ad said, "Escape to luxury. Escape to paradise." The commercial was for this place called Isla de Corrales, which is where Mom and Dad went for their honeymoon. And the reason I know that is because every time an ad for that place comes on TV, the two of them get all kissy-faced. It makes you uncomfortable thinking about Mom and Dad before they had us kids. And I wouldn't have to if Mom didn't break out their honeymoon album every year on their anniversary. The night after that ad came on, Mom and Dad made an announcement. They said that this year we were going to skip Christmas and all go to Isla de Corrales instead. When I asked how we're going to get our gifts to the resort, Mom said the trip was our gift. I thought that sounded like a terrible idea, and I was surprised Dad was on board with it. He usually doesn't like to spend a lot of money, and I was sure this resort was going to cost a fortune. But he said he was sick of the cold weather, and he wanted to escape to some place warm. Personally, I don't have a problem with cold weather. In fact, generally speaking, the worse it is outside, the happier I am. What could be more peaceful than sipping hot cocoa by the fire while Dad shovels the driveway? I figured Manny and Rod would help me put a sentence in Mom and Dad, and we put a stop to this idea. But those guys weren't any help at all. They were already walking around the house in sunglasses and swimsuits. So I had to accept that we weren't going to have a normal Christmas at home. But what I really didn't like was that we had to fly to this place. I'd never been on a plane before, and I wasn't crazy about the idea of locking myself up in a metal tube. Nobody else seemed worried, though, and 2 weeks later, on a night when we should have been hanging up our stockings and sitting around the fire watching Christmas specials, we were packing our suitcases for this island getaway. Monday. We left the house around 8 o'clock on the morning of Christmas Eve. Dad was pretty uptight because he wanted to leave an hour earlier, but Mom said he was being ridiculous and we get to the airport in plenty of time. It was only about 20 degrees outside, but Roderick was already dressed for warm vacation weather. It turned out Dad was right. We should have left earlier. Apparently, Christmas Eve is one of the busiest travel days of the year. So the roads were choked with families trying to see their relatives. And nobody really seemed to be in the Christmas spirit either. What made things a lot worse was when it started to snow. After that, things slowed to a crawl. Mom and Dad started arguing over what time we should have left, and Dad almost missed the exit for the airport. He had to cut across 3 lanes of traffic, which didn't look easy. When we reached the airport, the main parking lot was full. That meant we had to park in the economy lot, which was pretty far away. Dad said he'd drop the rest of us off at the curb with all the luggage and then come meet us after he parked. When we got to the passenger drop-off area, it was complete chaos. We tried to unload our bags, but the cops weren't letting anyone stop for more than 30 seconds. And that just stressed everyone out and made things worse. I had to get back in the van so I could help Dad with the rest of the bags. Ordinarily, that kind of thing would have been Roderick's job, but since he was dressed for 80-degree weather, he got out of it. He was lucky he did, too. When we got to the gate for the economy lot, Dad couldn't reach the ticket from his window, so he made me get out of the car to grab it. Unfortunately, I didn't notice that there was a giant slush puddle on my side of the car until I stepped in it. Splorsh! After we parked, we rolled our bags to the nearest shuttle stop, which wasn't a lot of fun. The sign said the shuttle bus to the main terminal came every 10 minutes. But there was no room for us in the bus shelter, so we had to wait outside in the freezing cold. 20 minutes went by without a bus, and Dad started getting really anxious about the time. He said we were just going to have to walk to the terminal, which was about a mile away. I would have tried to convince Dad to wait a little longer, but my sock was starting to turn to ice, and I didn't want to get frostbite. Sure enough, once we got about 100 feet from the shelter, the shuttle bus pulled into the parking lot. We tried to get the driver to stop, but he just blew right by us. So we ran to the shuttle stop, but we didn't make it back in time. Now Dad was really worried about missing our flight. I told him maybe missing the flight wouldn't be the worst thing to happen, but he didn't seem to be in the mood to hear what I had to say. By the time we got to the terminal, we were both soaking wet and miserable. So when a pickup truck almost hit us in the crosswalk, it made Dad really mad, and he let the driver know by kicking his back bumper. That just made the driver mad, and he pulled his truck over and stepped out of his vehicle. We didn't stick around long enough to talk things over with this guy. We ran in the opposite direction and blended in with some people standing on the sidewalk until the coast was clear. Dad told me I could have learned a lesson from this, which was to never lose your temper and do something stupid. But I took away a different lesson. When Heffleys get in trouble, Heffleys run. The rest of the family was waiting inside the entrance to the terminal. Mom wanted to know what took us so long, and Dad wanted to know why she hadn't gotten in line with Manny and Roderick and held a place for us. It took 20 minutes for us to get through the check-in line, but when Dad put our big suitcase on the scale, the person at the counter said it was too heavy, and it was going to cost extra money to check it. But Dad said the airline was ripping us off, and we were going to give them an extra nickel. So we took some clothes out of the suitcase and stuffed them into our carry-on bags. By the time we got everything sorted out, he had a half hour to get to our gate before our flight started boarding. And when we got to the security area, it was a total zoo. There were 2 lines, a long one for families and a short one for business travelers. I guess Dad usually gets to go through the business lane when he travels for work, so he didn't seem to be too happy about being stuck with the rest of us in the family lane. Anytime you add the word family to something, you know things are going to be bad. And trust me, I've been to enough family restaurants to know what I'm talking about. We waited in the security line a long time, and we finally made it to the front. But then some kid a few rows behind us started to pressing on the buttons on the poles that hold the barriers together. All of a sudden, there was nothing keeping the line separated, and for a second, no one moved. But then, things completely fell apart, with people pushing, stepping on each other, and pushing each other's nose with all directions. By the time the security agents got all the zip areas reconnected, we ended up at the back of the line. And the family with the kid who caused all the trouble was at the front. Now Mom and Dad were really stressed because our flight was supposed to leave at any minute. Dad begged one of the security agents to let us go to the front, but he didn't seem too sympathetic because he just kept reading his newspaper. I thought we were going to miss our flight, so I didn't really see the point of going through security. But Dad said sometimes they leave the gate open until the last second, and we might still make it. We finally got to the front of the line, and we put our bags on a conveyor belt. Then we took off our coats and shoes and put them into some plastic bins. Manny saw what the rest of us were doing, and he started taking off his clothes too. Luckily, Mom noticed in time and stopped him before he was totally naked. Apparently, Manny wasn't finished problems though. Apparently, he thought the conveyor belt was some kind of ride, and he was really upset when Mom took him out of the plastic bin. The people behind us were getting frustrated we weren't moving, but we were being held up by the guy in front of us. He had to move everything that he had on that was metal, one person at a time, and it was taking him forever. Roderick told me these machines can see through your clothes, and then someone checks a screen to make sure you're not trying to sneak by with anything dangerous. All I can say is, I wouldn't want to be the person with that job. It turns out, the X-ray machine that sees through your clothes is only for grown-ups, and kids go through a metal detector instead. Still, I wasn't going to take any chances. So I put my hands in front of my legs, just in case. Once we got through security, we grabbed our stuff from the conveyor belt and took off. Our gate was down to the lower level, so we had to take the escalator. We couldn't even do that without causing a major problem. Manny's stuffed animal got stuck in the bottom of the escalator, and he had to press the emergency stop button so Mom could pull it free. Dad checked his watch and said we might still make it, so we ran for our gate. But the gate was all the way at the other end of the terminal, and we knew we couldn't make it on time on foot. Just then, a cart for handicapped passengers came along, and Dad stopped it and asked the driver if we could hitch a ride. The rest of us got on board before she could say no. After that, it was smooth sailing. The terminal was pretty crowded, but people moved out of our way when they heard us coming. Honk! The driver dropped us off at our gate, but the door was closed. I thought that meant we had missed our flight and we could turn around and enjoy a nice Christmas Eve at home. But it turned out the flight was delayed, so all that stress was for nothing. The reason why the flight was delayed was because of the bad weather, and it was going to be another hour before we got on the plane. We looked for a place to sit down in the boarding area, but people were honking their seats with their bags or spreading out as much as possible. Some people were even lying down. Mom told me that once we got on the plane, we'd be in the air for about 6 hours, which was news to me. I asked her for some money, and I bought a couple of magazines, some snacks, and headphones at a shop near our gate. The only thing I needed that the store didn't have was socks. My right sock was still soaking wet from stepping in that puddle, so I went into the bathroom to wring it out in the sink. When I was done, my sock was still damp, and I really didn't want to put it back on my foot. The bathroom had one of those high-powered hand dryers, and that gave me an idea. To attach my sock to it. I couldn't wait to get back home and start making some money on this idea. I figured I could make a killing on rainy days as a street vendor with a sock drying machine. The only problem with the hand dryer in the airport bathroom was that it was a little too powerful. My sock started smoking, and then it went flying. Whoop! Sploosh! Right into a urinal. I decided I'd just get a new pair of socks at the resort, because there was no way I was going to wear something I had to fish out of a urinal. When I came back from the restroom, they were making an announcement at our gate. I figured they were ready to start boarding the plane, but they were just letting us know that there was another delay. And it went on like that for the rest of the day. Apparently, this storm was causing problems everywhere, and the plane we were supposed to fly out on was stuck at some other airport. I was starting to worry that my electronic device was going to run out of juice while I was on the plane, so I looked for a place to charge it. But I guess everything else was thinking the same thing. The charging station was completely packed. The only available outlet was in an awkward place, right in the doorway of the women's restroom. But when your battery's at 15%, you gotta do what you gotta do. Our plane finally arrived at the gate, and all of the passengers who were on it got off. But if flying is supposed to be fun, You'd never know it from the way these people looked. The gate agent got on the loudspeaker and said we'd be boarding shortly. Then she said our flight was overbooked and they needed a few volunteers to give up their seats. She said that whoever volunteered first would get $300 and a free night at the airport hotel. I didn't need to hear another word. I got to the desk before she even finished with her announcement and said I was her guide. Unfortunately, Mom wouldn't let me volunteer, and nobody else stepped up either. So the gate agent increased the offer to $500, and some woman snapped it up right away. I just hope she enjoys spending my money. After that, the agent made another announcement. She said the flight crew on our plane had worked too many hours because of all the delays, and we'd have to wait for our replacement crew to come in before we could take off. Now everyone at our gate was mad, because what was supposed to be an early flight was turning into an overnight one. When the new flight crew finally arrived, they didn't look too happy to be there. That's probably because they were expecting to spend Christmas Eve at home, so I knew exactly how they felt. After the crew got on board, they started letting passengers on the plane. My family got to go first, because they let people with young kids board before anyone else. But the gate agent stopped me at the door. She said my carry-on bag was too big to fit in the overhead bin, so it had to go down below with the rest of the luggage. That was fine with me, because I didn't want to deal with my bag on the plane anyway. When I got on board, I was pretty impressed. The seats were a lot bigger than I expected, and they were covered in real leather. I asked Mom what row we were in, but she said we need to keep moving. She said this was the first class section, and our seats were in economy. But the economy section wasn't half as nice as first class. The seats were packed together, and they barely had any cushioning. Mom said our seats were toward the middle of the plane, so we headed there. But Dad hung back in the first class section. He said he got upgraded because of all the frequent flyer miles, that he'd catch up with us after we landed. Mom didn't seem happy about this news. She said it wasn't fair for him to be in first class while we were in economy, so she said we'd all take turns sitting in Dad's seat during the flight. But Dad said the rest of us weren't experienced travelers like him, and we wouldn't even know how to act in first class. Luckily, there were other passengers trying to board, so Mom and Dad couldn't get into a full-blown argument right there in the aisle. Dad sat down in his seat, and we went to find ours. The rest of us were all in the same row. Mom, Roderick, and Mandy sat on one side of the aisle, and I had the middle seat on the other side. Roderick tried to get me to switch with him so he didn't have to sit by Mandy, but I was happy right where I was. I didn't really had a lot of leg room, but other than that, it wasn't even so bad. All of the other passengers boarded after us, and people seemed pretty stressed trying to get their stuff in the overhead bins. So I was glad they took my bag at the gate. Everyone put away their bags and sat down in their seats. The pilot made an announcement, said that the doors were closing, and the seats to my left and right were still empty. I couldn't believe my luck. As soon as we took off, I was going to stretch out across all 3 seats and get myself a good night's sleep. It was even better than being in first class. But right before the doors closed, one more couple got on board, and they had a baby with them. I didn't think these people would be my row because there were only 2 empty seats. But the baby sat in his mother's lap. See, if I were in charge of the airline, the rule would be 1 person per seat. Because this couple had twins, it would be completely out of hand. I asked these parents if one of them wanted to switch seats with me so they could be next to each other. But the mother said she likes the window, and her husband said he likes to be on the aisle. Right after that, the pilot came on the intercom. He said that before he took off, there would be a brief safety video to show us what to do in case of an emergency. I was already nervous about flying to begin with, and I didn't like hearing that we might be in an emergency. So when the safety video played, I paid attention. But as far as I could tell, I was the only person who did. Everybody else completely tuned out. The beginning of the video was just basic stuff, like how to fasten a seatbelt. But after that, it got serious. The video's narrator said that if there was a loss in cabin pressure, oxygen mask would drop down from the ceiling. Well, I don't know what cabin pressure is, but I didn't like hearing that we might lose it. The people in the video didn't look bothered at all when the oxygen mask dropped down. Though, in fact, they were smiling and looked kind of happy about it. Then, the video got even worse. The narrator said that in case of a water landing, we need to evacuate the plane. Now, I was really freaked out. I thought the whole point of an airplane was that it was supposed to stay in the air. The safety video said that there were emergency exits on the plane, and the people sitting in the exit rows would need to open the doors so everybody could get out. The emergency exit was one row behind me, and I realized the people sitting there weren't paying attention to the video at all. So I snapped my fingers to get them to put down their magazines and listen up. The flight attendants didn't even seem bothered that there was no one watching the safety video. I figured they probably have their own exits, like one of the flight attendants flushing himself down a toilet. So if there was any trouble, I was gonna follow them. The video showed on the plane in the water with inflatable slides coming off the emergency exits. And they actually made it look kind of fun. Whee! Whee! Then, the video said our seat cushions doubled as flotation devices. Now, each one had a whistle attached to it. Now I had questions, so I pressed the button above my seat to get the flight attendant to come over. What I wanted to know was, if we landed in shark-infested waters, would it really be such a good idea to blow the whistle? It felt to me that we'd basically be inviting the sharks over for a free lunch. The flight attendant said I didn't need to worry because all the seat cushions were coated with shark repellent, so they wouldn't even come near us. I was pretty happy to hear that, but now I'm wondering if he was pulling my leg. I don't really get the point of the whistles though. It's not like anybody's going to hear them if they're in the middle of the ocean. And if you're really lucky enough to have a cruise ship pass by, believe me, those guys aren't stopping to pick you up because they'll be too busy listening to music, drinking champagne, and eating a duh. After the safety video was over, I felt exhausted, and we haven't even taken off yet. But a few seconds later, the plane started rolling down the tarmac, and the next thing I knew, we were in the air. I'm not gonna lie, I had my eyes shut during the whole takeoff, and I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until I almost passed out. Once we leveled off, the couple sitting in my row started feeding their baby. I was already nauseous from the takeoff, and the smell of mushy peas didn't help things. "Here comes the choo-choo," the dad kept saying. I thought I might actually throw up, but I didn't know what to do. Then I noticed this white paper bag in the seat pocket in front of me, and there was a picture of someone throwing up. And I'd figure that's exactly what it's for. The flight attendant already seemed annoyed with me, though, so I knew he wouldn't be too happy if I handed him a bag of vomit. "Here you go." Somehow, I managed to get through the feeding without throwing up. But I wish I could say the same thing for the baby, 'cause the baby threw up as well. After the lady cleaned it up, she reached into her bag and gave the baby a couple of toys to play with. One of the toys was a plastic hammer, and as soon the baby got that thing in its hand, it started pounding on the window. I've heard that if a window on a plane breaks, everything inside gets sucked outside, and that really didn't seem like a good way to go. So when the lady's head was turned, I swiped the hammer from the baby and tucked it under my seat. Unfortunately, that set the baby off. It turns out nobody likes a crying baby on a plane, and everyone started shooting us dirty looks. Luckily, the lady had a bottle in her bag, and that quieted the kid down for a while. I was getting kind of hungry myself, so I pressed the button for the flight attendant and asked when we could expect to get fed. But he said meals were only for first-class passengers, and he gave me a bag of peanuts to hold me over. That's when I remembered the snacks. I bought before we got on the plane. But then I remembered that they were my carry-on bag, which was stowed down below. I guess Mom must have been thinking about food too, because as soon as the pilot said we had reached our cruising altitude, we were free to move out the cabin. Mom unbuckled her seatbelt and went up to first class with Manny, just in time for dinner. I felt something cold and clammy touch my left elbow, and then something else touched my right one. The guy behind me had taken off his shoes and socks and slid his feet between the spaces between the seats. So I guess this guy decided it was okay to use my armrest as his footrests. I was starting to feel boxed in, and that's when the person in the seat in front of me tilted his seat back all the way. So it was just a few inches from my face. I tried to tilt my seat back, but I couldn't find the button to do it. So I called the flight attendant and asked him where the button was. But he told me the seats in our row didn't tilt back because they blocked the emergency row. Now I was starting to sweat. I thought I'd read a magazine to take my mind off feeling trapped, but the only thing in the seat pocket was a catalog for all the stuff no one needs. Like pizza blanket. Nighttime's cravings, set aside them with the pizza blanket. Edible bedding that's warm and tasty. Comes in pepperoni, extra cheese, and anchovies. And snoozos. When you just can't sit through that boring meeting, snoozos glasses make you look wide awake. Even but when you're anything but. And phone bubble. Protect your phone on rainy days with this clear plastic bubble. The people on the other side of me were watching a movie, so I figured I'd turn on my screen and check it out. The movie looked like a comedy, but my headphones were in my bag, and it was hard to understand what was going on without them. In fact, they were all laughing. I changed the channel to see what else there was to watch. One channel had a show for little kids, and the baby next to me got interested when I was on my screen. And when I changed it to something else, the kids started bawling. When I changed the channel back, the baby stopped crying. I guess I would have been okay with letting the kid watch the show, but the screen was way too close to my face, and the colors on the show were so bright that even when I put on the eye mask that was in the seat pocket, I could still see everything that was happening. When the show finally ended, the baby started crying again. But there was no way I was going to keep watching the show on repeat for the rest of the night. So I decided it was my perfect time to take my shift up in first class. But Roderick noticed I was trying to make a move, and he got out of his seat before I had a chance to. And once he was up in first class, I knew I'd have to wait for a while before I could swap places with him. When Mom and Manny came back to their seats, I saw the door to the cockpit open behind them, and the pilot stepped out. I thought there might be some kind of emergency, so I pressed the button and asked the flight attendant what was going on. He said the pilot just needed to stretch his legs and use the bathroom, and the co-pilot had everything under control. I didn't like the fact of that we were just going down to the pilot, even if it was just a few more minutes. Personally, I don't think 2 pilots is enough, even when they're both in the cockpit. I guess the idea is that if one of them has a heart attack, then the other one is supposed to fly the plane. But I asked the flight attendant what happens if the other pilot freaks out and has a heart attack too. The flight attendant told me not to worry, because these planes are so high-tech, they can practically fly themselves. Well, I've heard pilots make a lot of money, so what the flight attendant was saying is true, because I could just play video games while the pilots fly themselves. Once the pilot got out of the bathroom, I figured it was a good idea for me to go too. The problem was, the man to my right was asleep, and I couldn't get over the guy without waking him up. So I went under him, and believe me, that wasn't a lot of fun. I walked toward the front of the plane, but before I even got to the first class section, the flight attendant told me that economy passengers have to use the restroom in the back. The bathroom in the economy section was really small, but being there was 100 times being stuck in my seat. It was sort of like a tiny apartment I had all to myself. In science class, we learned that when human waste gets dropped out of an airplane toilet, it freezes solid. Some guy in my town once followed chunk of waste that fell from a plane, and he thought it was a meteorite. Exclusive. Meteorite crashes through man's shed. I think the guy was hoping to sell it for a lot of money, but once the thing thawed, he thought out what he had was totally worthless. Once I settled into the bathroom, I figured there was no reason to go back to my seat. So when someone else came along to use it, I just made bathroom noises. Forbit. Ribbit. Until they went away. One person must have really needed to go because they shook the door handle so hard that I thought it might actually break off. Then they went away. But a few minutes later, the whole bathroom shook. Whoever this was needed to use the bathroom a lot more than I did, so I opened the door, but there was no one there. That's when I realized it wasn't just the bathroom shaking, it was the whole plane. I thought we must have landed in the water or lost an engine or something. But then the pilot came on the intercom. Folks, we just hit a little patch of bumpy air. That didn't sound right to me. I figured what really happened was the pilot fell asleep in his seat and kicked the steering wheel or something. And then he came up with this bumpy air excuse. Because that's exactly what I'd do if I were in the same situation. I guess the flight attendant could see that I was pretty rattled. He said we were just going through a little turbulence, which was perfectly normal for a flight like this. Well, if this kind of thing is normal, then there's no chance I'm ever becoming a pilot. Because if I were flying a plane, I'd be out of there parachuting into space. That was a third sign of trouble. The flight attendant told me I had to return to my seat and buckle up. But when I got back there, it was already occupied by the baby, and the whole family was asleep. I didn't want to move the baby, because I knew it would just wake up and start crying again. So I went up to the front of the plane to kick Roderick out of first class and let him deal with the baby. But I couldn't get to him. One of the wheels on the beverage cart had broken because of the turbulence, and it was blocking my way. I was out of options, so I went back to my seat. Don't ask me how, but I was actually able to get an hour or two of sleep, and I was so tired, I didn't even wake up when we landed. Tuesday. I was so worried about getting through the flight that I never thought about where we were actually going. But when I stepped off the plane, it was like walking into a whole new world. I've got to admit, as soon as I felt that tropical air hit my skin, I could understand why Dad was so eager to escape the cold back home. We got our luggage off from the conveyor belt in the baggage claim, then followed the signs to where a bus was waiting. Even though the air outside felt great, the air conditioning on the bus felt even better, and the seats in this thing were nicer than the ones in first class. Once all the passengers boarded the bus, we headed to the resort. A video played on the overhead monitors, and it was about 1,000,000 times more fun than anyone on the plane. The video showed all the cool activities at the resort, like jet skiing, windsurfing, and boat surfing. And one of the activities was swimming with dolphins, and that's something I've always wanted to do. But there was a bunch of other things that looked cool, too. I was hoping that they might let us combine activities, like combine with a dolphin, so I could do everything before we had to go back home. I felt kind of bad for being so negative about this trip until then, and I turned around to tell Mom and Dad I was sorry. But they were smooching, so I wish I just kept watching the video instead. When we stepped off the bus at the resort, the staff greeted us. "Welcome to Badass," and headed Mom and Dad throws and drinks. We gave our bags to these guys wearing white gloves, and they said they'd take them directly to our room. And I gotta say, I was impressed. We went to the front desk, and the lady there explained how everything worked. She said the resort was all-inclusive, so we didn't need to use cash or credit cards. This ends video 1. Thank you for watching me read the video 1 of Diary of a Wimpy Kid, The Getaway. So we'll see you the next time I read a book of Diary of a Wimpy Kid.